Adventurers who don't believe in humanity will save the world, Chapter 123, Karen's Question, Part 1. A beastly sound echoed in the goblin forest. The sound came from none other than goblins. With axes made by grinding stone and attaching it to a stick, and poorly maintained rusty swords, they attacked someone while letting out rough voices. The person being attacked showed no sign of panic, and strongly swung the long sword. Serya. The tip of the sword drew a perfect arch and cleanly severed the head of a goblin, before its lifeless body dropped to the ground. The other goblins seemed shaken, but it was too late to get away, and they were all fed to the sword. Ah! Karen took a deep breath after defeating the goblins, but showed no sign of exhaustion. And then, applause could be heard. Yes, good job, Karen. It seems you are getting used to it. You're starting to look good with that sword too. Karen smiled at Bond and Sem's compliments. The three had gone to the goblin forest to conquer it as a way to train for Thousand Sword Peak. Yes, but it's a little light. But it is the thickest one we could buy, said Bond, as Karen casually waved the sword. It was by no means a small sword, but it was shorter and thinner than Karen's dragon bone sword. And what about you, Sem? I'm not used to blades, not even short swords. Sem said as he shrugged. It is not as though you are weak, but you only use blunt weapons. Perhaps it would be better for you to use a smaller, blunt sword and use it as though it were a hammer. Giving up on cutting and focusing on hitting. That does make sense. You can use healing magic in Thousand Sword Peak, so perhaps you should focus on protecting yourself. You can use support magic as well. Yes. Karen agreed. Let's keep going then, said Sem, but Bond's expression suddenly changed. Moo. Adventurers are approaching. Oh. Newbies? No, they seem to be walking with purpose, and with no sign of hesitation. In fact. What? It seems to be a dragon person and one of the humans we recently met. Karen's face stiffened as she heard this. So Karen's sister, Suasen then? She appears to be her height, and there are not many dragon people, so probably. What are they doing here? Most likely the same as us, training. They are operating under the same conditions. So what should we do? If we continue our exploration, we'll probably bump into them. Yes, what shall we do? Sem and Bond looked towards Karen, who timidly responded. Let's watch them for just a bit. I do not mind, but. Then, let's hide. The three then cleaned up the goblins' bodies and quickly hid in the bushes. It was Suasen and the swordsman named Marcus. Suasen held a very normal-looking staff made from ordinary-looking wood with a blade at the tip, and Marcus held a large two-handed sword, although not as large as Karen's dragon bone sword. Your movements are splendid. You should think about being an adventurer again. Suasen had defeated a group of 5 goblins in the blink of an eye. By utilizing the length of her staff to its full potential, she slaughtered them all with one hit each. Don't be silly. It's just this one time. What a waste. I'm going back home anyway. Well, I won't ask too much about that. What I need to do now is to get back into shape. It's been a long time, and if I'm rusty I'll be doing a disservice to Mr. Bellocchio, said Suasen before she started taking deep breaths. Karen seemed confused as she saw this. Karen, be quiet, said Bond. Why yes. They were squatting behind bushes a little far away. They could barely hear them from that distance, but thanks to Bond's excellent hearing, he could relay to them what was being said. Before long, a haze of sorts started enveloping Suasen, and a pure aura shrouded the area. What is it? I feel a lot of strength. Dragon people are incredible. Can you attack me for a bit? Are you sure? I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't. Goblins are a bit too weak, but training in other labyrinths might be dangerous. Alright, but I won't give it my all since we're just training. You can hold back, but don't be careless on purpose. Marcus held his sword high and swung it at Suisun, with no intention to stop before hitting her. Guh. Hard. Suisun blocked the sword with her arm as if it were a shield, but there was not a single scratch where the sword hit. Ah. That went well, don't you think? It's not enough. A few years ago, I was stronger and I didn't take this long to prepare. It can't be helped, you were raising a kid. Key. Moo. Is that a monster? Karen was unable to contain her surprise for a second, and although it should have been barely audible from that distance, Suisun and Marcus got ready to fight. Oh, a boar piglet. Coincidentally, a small boar ran past Marcus. There are actually boars and birds in this forest. I guess boars are actually stronger than goblins. Kids are tough, even animals. Alright. Let's go take down the hobgoblin, and if that's not enough, we can spar later or something. Thank you. Suisun and Marcus said as they disappeared deeper into the forest. What a strange power. It looks a little different than support magic. That appears to be something exclusive to the dragon race. I imagine other races cannot use it. Do you know what that is, Karen? Sem asked, but Karen stayed silent. Karen. Ah, that's. It's not much different than my fire dragon slash. I think its power is being used to cover the body and raise defense instead of in a weapon. Answered a flustered Karen. But. I can't use it without my dragon bone sword, and even if I had it, I can't use it like that, only on defense. How did she do that? Karen's mumbling sounded a little fake. Sem and Bond felt as though she was not really curious. Or rather, her interest was in something else. Is there anything else that stuck out to you? Asked Sem, and Karen nodded. My sister eloped. Yes, I heard that before. And she mentioned a baby. Yes. So. Where's her husband? And if she eloped, why does she want to go back? Sem thought Karen's questions made sense. If Karen's sister preferred to live with her husband instead of her hometown, she would not be telling Karen to go back with her, and if she only wanted to visit, she would not be so forceful about it. Karen did not know what her husband looked like, and Suisun had never talked about him either. It really is strange. Adventurers who don't believe in humanity will save the world, Chapter 124, Karen's Question, Part 2. After getting back from the Goblin Forest, Karen headed straight to see Anemone and sat down next to Nick, who was having dinner. And that's it. I want to look into my sister's past and career. Do you know how? After hearing the whole story, Nick put his hand on his chin and started thinking. How to look into someone's past. Yes. Karen waited for Nick's answer with great interest. Bond and Sem returned with her, and the former laid limply on the couch and the latter helped an employee washing dishes. At this point, they pretty much felt completely at home. Like what she's been doing, right? If it was a has-been adventurer like Leon or the kind of person that hangs out in the abandoned area, the best option would be to go to Manhunt. Now that you mention it, apparently Suisun was an adventurer. Marcus looked impressed too. But she's not a has-been or anything, I think she did pretty well. An adventurer. I remember hearing about a really good dragon person years ago, but I never saw her. Nick suddenly stopped, and seemed not too confident in what he said next. We can learn an adventurer's history if we ask the guild, but I doubt they'll tell me right away if I ask. Does it take too long? They're not used to it. Work that doesn't earn money tends to end up getting put off. It's faster if we ask someone that hangs out with the employees to step in. Sounds shady. Hangs out, step in. These words seem suspicious to Karen. They really are shady people, but at least one's alright. He's probably still there, so. Sem, Bond, can I step away for a while? I want to go somewhere with Karen. I have no issues with it. I don't mind either, but now that I think about it, is Tiana not back yet? Asked Sem, and Nick responded with an iffy expression. No, she came back, but she ran off to the library straight away. Oh. She studies hard, doesn't she? I didn't even have time to stop her. Once she gets something in her mind, her dynamism is incredible. Nick shrugged, and Karen pulled his sleeve. Nick? So what are we going to do? Oh, wait, I completely forgot to ask you. Do you want to go there now? Yes, but where exactly? A detective agency. It was a corner of a slightly dirty-looking building. It did not have the vulgar atmosphere of sea anemone, but neither the clear intention to make the customers relax and feel at ease. The closest comparison would be Olivia's publisher Mysterious Terrain. That was Wood's trusted investigation office. It's been a while, Nick. You look well. Which is kind of surprising considering all I've heard. A 30-ish-year-old man wearing a worn-out cap and a worn-out shirt welcomed Nick and Karen. On his desk filled with documents was an ashtray with a pile of cigarettes. It was almost like a microcosm of his office. So you did hear about it. A lot did happen, but how much do you know? Nick leaned back on a sofa and sighed deeply. Well, I know you left all martial arts and formed a party called Survivors. You've been going up the ranks too, so I see you make a good leader. Who knows? You do. So what brings you here? Said the man as he lit another cigarette. Hey. Aren't those all paper rolled? I see you're doing well. I've been getting them cheap from the capital. Want one too? Nah. Let's talk about work. All right. Said the man as he peeked towards Karen. You're Survivor Karen, aren't you? You used to be in the vanguard of White Heelan. For a second, Nick was worried Karen would be furious, but there was not a bit of anger on her face. Yes. And you? I'm Hector Woods, kind of an adventurer. Kind of. I don't really work as an adventurer. I go to Manhunt once in a while and join parties to make up the numbers, but my main occupation is as a detective. Karen clearly thought that word was interesting, and her tail swung slightly. What does a detective do? I investigate cheating spouses, do background checks, and things like that. Sometimes when someone owes money, I look into how much. This answer did not match Karen's expectations, and her tail stopped moving. Is that different from the adventurers in Manhunt? This time Nick answered Karen's question. The people that Manhunt goes after are usually criminals and people with bounties on their heads. People in this line of work investigate regular people and nobles. I used to be a civil servant, you know. I used to compile and edit directories and account books in the capital. Hector was a minor noble living in the capital, until a certain incident drove him out. Karen felt sympathy for him, until he explained further and told her he was driven out because he hit on a married woman. People leading normal lives and especially rich people and nobles are easy to investigate. I also act as a mediator when people want a letter of recommendation from a noble or to be a guarantor for an apartment and that sort of thing. Well, that's how he is, but I guarantee he keeps his promises. Nick shrugged, knowing full well that was not a glowing endorsement. No matter what town you live in, the inhabitants are managed more or less the same way. As long as there are documents, they can be investigated. As for everyone else, like people with bounties and bandits, I think you're better suited to deal with them. Oh, I forgot, do you want some tea? Milk or sugar? Just sugar. Neither. How did you two meet? Karen asked with a certain coldness in her expression. A long time ago Nick saved me from some bandits at night, and I solved some of all martial arts troubles. Give and take, you know. Hector smiled as he poured tea. Despite his rough appearance and manner of speech, he excellently handled his tea utensils. He handed them amber-colored tea, crossed his legs, and smiled boldly. I bet I can guess why you're here. What? I don't know where Karios of White Helan is either. Ah. Hector was confused by the surprise on Nick and Karen's faces. Oh. Didn't the old woman in the guild tell you? He could only mean one person, Wilma. No, that's the first I'm hearing of it. Did they hire you too? Yes, but it's almost impossible to do an investigation on a professional bandit. I did finish my investigation of the adventurer side of Karios, but the rest is up to the knights. I see. So. Is it something else? Is it about all martial arts? No. Did something happen with them? They're on a break. Nick seemed not too interested. Well, no matter what they said, they did lose an important piece when you left. I imagine they're scrambling to replace you. That's fine, it doesn't concern me. We're getting off track, I want to talk about something else. What is it? I want you to investigate a dragon person adventurer. Blurted out Karen. If she's a part of a guild, that should be easy. Tell me about her. Apparently she was an adventurer, but then she started doing something else, and now she's in a party called Wanderers. She had to start from scratch and she's E rank now. Answered Karen. What's her name? How old is she? Suisun Tsubaki, and I'm pretty sure she's 28. She has a baby too. Did she get married and have a baby in this town? Probably. Okay, that's enough. How long do I have and what do you want to know? 5 days, and as much as you can. That's not a lot of time. If she has a baby, she should have a husband. I want to know what happened to him. Karen set the conditions with no hesitation. Nick was a little surprised, but quietly listened. Alright, got it. I'll contact you when I get the information. Where are you living now? In an inn close to Fisherman. Here. Nick wrote the name and location of the inn where he was staying and handed it to Hector. You should live somewhere better. I guess it's not so bad considering the rent. That's none of your business. Is what I'd like to say, but it's been feeling kind of cramped lately. Nick's room had both his things and bonds. Nick, are you moving? Asked Karen. I've been thinking about it, but I think it'd actually be cheaper to rent an apartment instead of looking for a better inn, so I need to settle down and take my time looking. A room like Tiana's is useful. But I'm not a noble, and to make matters worse I'm an adventurer, so I would need to get a guarantor. There's Red, but we also have to think about the letter of recommendation to rise to D rank. Red is a good person, but we shouldn't ask too much. Yeah. He says we've been doing a lot for him too, but he's always accommodating us. Nick suddenly stopped. Hey Karen. Wasn't Karios, or rather, White Helan C rank? Yes. Then someone had to give them a letter of recommendation. Who? Adventurers who don't believe in humanity will save the world, Chapter 125, Karen's Question, Part 3. Well. They paid someone to write it, right? Karen answered, and Hector nodded in agreement. That's true. I've been asked by the order to look into it, and I found that they paid 10,000 dinar to have it written. Is that really all? What, Nick? Do you have something in mind? If you hang around the adventurers of a place like Fisherman, you can easily find poor nobles that will write whatever you want if you pay them. But if your plan is to disappear without a trace, and you don't want to get too involved with someone, it's probably not that easy, especially when you don't want the person writing the letter of recommendation to do anything unnecessary. It's a bigger blind spot the more they know the adventurer. Really? There's a lot of poor second and third sons of nobles. But don't forget that he wouldn't want them to do anything unnecessary. Would Karios, who is crossing such a dangerous bridge, use a noble he's never met before? Hector's face became more serious. Probably not. They could demand more money, or even threaten him. Many of these people are always scheming for a little more pocket change, and the fastest way to get it is from people that are basically committing fraud in the first place. Do you think it's worth looking into whoever wrote that letter of recommendation, Hector? I get what you mean, but... What? It's all just a guess, right? It's your job to find that out. Does that mean I can treat this as a request? Hector peeked over at Karen. How much does that cost normally? I don't know, but... Wait. Old Wilma paid me to tell her if I found anything interesting. You're not going to charge both of us, are you? Nick's expression was clearly disagreeable, and Hector responded with his own displeased smile. Calm down, I'm not. But I accepted hers first, so if I find anything I'll tell her first, and then make sure it reaches your ears too. If they're stingy with their reward, help me out with the costs. When I feel like an investigation is going to take a good amount of time and money, I like to have an estimate up front. How about it? Yes, thanks. You've got a deal. Hector held out his hand, and Karen shook it. Nick had some strange feelings as he watched them. The sun had set by the time they left, but the streets were still busy. Winter was one thing, but most people worked during the summer. At night, the streets naturally filled up with people. Nick and Karen bought food from the stalls on the way back, something called fried octo. It was made by taking the legs of a creature named octolegs that resembled an octopus with a shell on its back, covering them with wheat flour diluted in water, and frying them. Octolegs were a specialty of regions close to the ocean, but since they had strong vitality, they could be transported live without having to freeze them, as was necessary with other kinds of seafood. It was a kind of seafood that everyone, from poor people to nobles, could enjoy. It's also good if you soak it in soup or eat it with lots of cheese. Yes. The stalls in the Hammer Alley have been doing that lately. ACH. Careful not to get burned. Karen giggled. It feels like you've been becoming more mature. Nick's sudden comment silenced Karen. Hey, are you alright? Don't say weird things. Jeez. Karen swallowed the fried octo she still had in her mouth and took a deep breath. And then, she timidly asked. What do you mean? The way you calmly dealt with a shady guy like Hector. And you didn't get mad at him for talking about your past right after meeting him. That. Karen seemed a little disappointed by his answer, but at the same time breathed a sigh of relief. I'm not lying. You didn't notice that? No, that's not it. How do I say this? Karen put her hand on her chin, and started talking once she found the right words. Humans don't have tails. That's right. And their ears don't really move. I can move mine a little. Really? No, wait, that's not the point. Karen seemed a little exasperated, and Nick apologized with an innocent smile. Sorry. Go on. It's a little unfair. Is it? It's easy not to let it show when you're happy or sad. That's true, but we can't hear from very far away either, and our sense of balance is worse than races with tails. Your sense of balance is better than cat people's. Most people can't do a handstand on one finger. That's a product of my training. Nick proudly smiled, but Karen nodded in agreement. Yes, it's because you trained. And I changed the way I think about it. To stop thinking it's unfair. The way you think. How? I try to imagine what people in front of me would look like if they had big ears and tails. If I talk while imagining that, I forget to get mad. Nick felt a chill as he heard this, not because he thought it was unpleasant or anything, but out of respect. How did Hector's ears and tail move? Like someone that's sad because his hunt failed but he's trying not to let it show. Like he's trying to keep his tail straight but it's drooping at the tip. That just sounds cute. He knew about what happened to you and me, but didn't help you, and failed with his investigation of Karios too. I guess that's true. Maybe. He feels a little awkward. Like maybe he wanted to do something but couldn't. Karen once again put her hand on her chin as she thought. I think you're giving him too much credit. But she was not too far off the mark. Nick knew. Even if some of the wording was wrong, Nick would probably agree that on some unconscious level, Hector was working out of guilt. Nick would sometimes grumble about all martial arts to Hector, and since Hector himself was a literary person of sorts, he agreed with Nick. When Nick was kicked out of his party, Hector sympathized more with him than the rest of his former party members. He also probably planned to win Nick's favor. If there was one exceptional element in all of this, it was how quickly Nick formed another party and got back on his feet. Then let's have him work hard. Yes. There's something else I want to ask. What? Nick was about to ask how his tail moved, but as he saw Karen happily walk through the street at night, he stopped. As he saw her poke her head into the stalls looking for something tasty, he felt as though the mature expression she had before was replaced by one of an innocent girl. It's nothing. Nick's heart was shaken when Hector talked about what was going on with all martial arts, but hid it. Since Karen could see through Hector, he wondered if she also saw through him. Weird. But he figured there was no point in thinking about it. Karen was Karen. They had exposed their embarrassing pasts to each other, so it was too late to care about that. Accepting that she knew about it felt important to him somehow. Forget about it, I'm thirsty. Let's get something to drink. Yes. They walked leisurely through the streets. It was almost summer, and there was a restless feeling about the night stalls. The sound of people practicing their singing and dancing somewhere far away reached Nick's ears. Adventurers who don't believe in humanity will save the world, Chapter 126, Suesen's Thoughts, Part 1. The southwestern area of the Labyrinth City was mostly populated by the middle class. The areas in the southeast and near the East Gate were not safe, but the western side was the complete opposite. It was filled with peaceful residential areas, thriving stores, and factories and studios where workers did their jobs. Not a single drunkard could be seen lying on the streets, and very few stray dogs even. Suesen, let's have lunch. Ah, yes. Located in one of said streets was the studio of an armorer. His skills were top-notch, and he had a good reputation for being affable and attentive, especially for a dwarf, since they were known to be moody people. The worker, his wife and son, and a widowed dragon person managed the studio. Since there were so few people, their output was low, but they had many loyal customers. You don't have to work so hard. I do. This is sort of like my last service. Suesen stopped working, stood up, and headed towards the back of the studio. The studio also served as the owner's home, so they ate there as well. Ah, thank you ma'am. Was she a good girl? She slept soundly the whole time. I think she feels more at ease with her mother around. The wife of the owner of the studio, who was also a dwarf, held a baby in her arms, but not a dwarven baby. This baby was growing horns on her head, although they were still very small and barely visible, and her arms were covered in blue, transparent scales from the elbows down. It was clearly a dragon person's baby. Suesen, someone's here. The son of the dwarven couple called. His age could be said to sit between being a small child and a boy, and his face, although covered in soot, resembled his father's. You idiot. Did you greet a customer looking like that? Go wash your face right now. I was just helping with work, it's fine. And it's not for you Dad, it's for Suesen. Me. Is it Mr. Bellocchio? Suesen walked towards the entrance with a puzzled expression. I'm here. Sis. What awaited Suesen was her sister, who she met just a few days before. Karen. Geez, you're bothering the owners you know. Same to you. Karen and Suesen walked through town side by side. The quiet peace of the streets in the west felt very different to Karen than what she was used to. However, even though she saw herself as someone that did not like disorderly, noisy places, she strangely found herself more at home in her normal environment. I'm surprised you knew where I was. I didn't follow you around. Hector's investigation took 2 days, and he found where she currently resided, and what she had been doing since arriving in the Labyrinth City. The investigation advanced very swiftly because she had been living like a proper townsperson. Suisun entered the city as the wife of a traveling merchant/adventurer. From there, she helped her husband with his work, and put her toughness to use as an adventurer. They lived not in a cheap inn, but in the kind of apartment that would require a guarantor. However, her husband had since passed away. He went to a port town by himself to deliver some goods, and contracted a disease. By the time he returned to the Labyrinth City, he was already half dead, and although they had a priest treat him, it was to no avail. Suisun became a widow, and was left with a newborn baby, her husband's remaining money, and her connections as an adventurer. Since she was a dragon person, she had an interest in fighting, but had other skills as well. One of them was fixing armor, since she would frequently fix her husband's, especially his chainmail. She possessed both the raw strength of a dragon person and dexterity on par with dwarves, and was hired by a dwarf that saw that potential in her. He also felt sorry for her, as himself and her husband used to do business, but the fact of the matter was that the armor she made was good enough to gain a reputation. Karen learned most of what she wanted to know about Suisun, and the rest, she would have to ask herself. That was why she made her way there. Who told you where I was? No one. I had someone investigate you. Did that leader of yours put you up to this? No. He introduced me to a detective, but I was the one that made the decision. Really? Yeah. Suisun seemed surprised, and just as she thought about what to ask next, Karen instead asked her a question. What's your baby's name? Reika. She's your niece, right? So it's a girl. Yes. You can see her later. Yes. They sat on a bench as they continued talking. Suisun bought steamed buns at a stall on the way. Eat. Okay. Karen thought about how it had been many years since they last ate together, and that it was probably the first time without anyone else around. So, why did you go through all that trouble to find out where I am? I wanted to ask some things. What? Like? Don't you remember what I used to tell you? If you're going to talk, think. Why did you leave home? Did you hate it there? Suisun was taken aback for a second by such a blunt question. She took a bite out of the steamed bun, chewed, swallowed, and hesitatingly answered. It's not like I hated uncle and aunt, or you. You've always been family to me. Suisun's parents had passed away, and her uncle, Karen's father, took her in. They were also cousins, but since she had been around for as long as Karen could remember, she could hardly see her as such. But I think I just wanted my own place. You own. Thinking about it now, they took care of me, and asked me if I was interested in marriage meetings. I was thankful, but having to be thankful to someone else every day was suffocating. But I really should have shared what I had to say instead of just leaving home like I was running away. I see. After that, I used my spear to take down monsters and helped with my husband's work. Are you working as an armorer while taking care of your baby? You sure did your homework. You had me investigated as well, didn't you? I did. Said Suisun, before facing Karen. But why are you working as an adventurer now? You almost died, and your orb was stolen. Why? I was lucky, you know. Karen found what her sister said to be very surprising. It was not something one would expect to come out of the mouth of someone whose parents and husband were dead and was left to raise her child on her own. My husband was kind. He didn't just take in a kid that knew nothing like me and tricked me. I learned a lot after coming to this city, and even at times where it seemed I would get cheated or killed, I managed to struggle through it. My daughter is healthy too. A lot happened, but I don't consider myself unfortunate. Suesen's eyes were focused far away. She was not putting on a fake front. Even if she had gone through some painful experiences, she was strong enough to take it. The girl in Karen's memories was more sensitive and rash. That's why I want to go back home and tell them about it. I figured since you're walking such a dangerous path, I should take you with me. I understand. You do. Does that mean we can cancel the match and you'll come with me? That's not it. Karen then asked Suesen a question in a very calm tone. Were you so aggressive because you didn't trust the other members of Survivors? Yes. Did you think they were taking advantage of me? Suesen sighed and nodded. When it comes to groups like adventurers' parties, people tend to feel guilty about leaving even if they have bad experiences or are bossed around. Suesen explained. But that doesn't mean you owe them anything. Some people are awfully good at making you feel like you owe them. They're so smart it's unfair. Even if they can't read difficult things or do complex calculations, they know others' weaknesses and how hard it is to go against them. There are many like that, especially in places where shady people gather. If it was before, Karen would have certainly angrily denied it. Was Suesen calling the person she owed so much to a bad guy? Or was she talking about a man she was deceived by? A man named Karios. What should be done about someone so attached to something important that it clouded their vision? Karen did not have the answer. Is that why you want to take me back by force via the match? Suesen looked at Karen as though she was looking at something strange. You are Karen, aren't you? Suesen's eyes were filled with surprise. Is there something weird about me? Now, Didn't you used to be? Dumber? No, sorry, that came out wrong. I mean, you used to have a shorter temper. Like you could only see what was right in front of you. I'm leaving. Sorry. What I mean to say is that you've grown. You're not like what you used to be. Karen tried to get up, but Suesen pushed her down. After hearing her sister, Karen sighed. Did you think my party was ripping me off? Yeah. That's not the case. Karen quietly denied it. I'm not mad or anything. We share our rewards, and I've even been taught how to count and read the account book. I can ask about what I don't know and Nick. And the others will tell me. And he tells me to doubt him instead of trusting him blindly. Suesen let out a surprised voice, and Karen laughed, as if to say, got you. It's weird. Said Karen. What a weird guy. Adventurers who don't believe in humanity will save the world, Chapter 127, New Weapon. My husband. Ein was a strange guy as well. Not as much as your leader though. What was he like? Karen did not remember the man that left with Suesen very well. All she remembered was that he was very quiet for a man that went all the way to their remote region. He was a troublesome fellow that would stick his nose into everything. He could never ignore someone in need, and hated injustice, even though he was weak. He tricked me, you know. At first I liked how kind and quiet he was, but he turned out to be very stubborn. We traveled and adventured together. Had a child, and then settled here. Said Suesen with a light laugh. It was not a lonely laugh, or one that seemed weak and fleeting. Do you want to go back home? Yes. Do you hate it here? Yes, it's very crowded. There are too many people, many of them bad. I've been given a lot, but lost a lot as well. Then. Karen was about to ask if she regretted it, but stopped. Her sister's face was not one of a loser, pretending she had not lost. If she was returning home, she was doing so triumphantly. Then what? Nothing. Said Karen, before she stuffed her cheeks with her steamed bun. And here I was thinking you were more mature. Go easy on your food. Eat more slowly. It's fine. So what are you going to do? About what? Now that you understand what I've been doing, I don't think we need a match. This is this and that's that, and I owe Mr. Bellocchio too. And above all else, if you can't beat us, you can't rank up. Eh. The match is still on. Come at us with all you have. Do you really want to go back to the village? At the very least, I'm going back. And what Mr. Bellocchio said is true. What? Being an adventurer is a fleeting occupation. Your leader got mad, but it's true that you never know when you'll die. If you really want to swing a sword, there are better jobs, and if you can afford to pick something else, you should. And you? What? You lost your Dragon King orb. You. Karen groaned like she had been stabbed with a knife. Well. I've been trying to get it back. Swason sighed and shrugged at Karen's timid response. It's not going to be easy to get back something that was stolen. Don't you think you should at least go and apologize? That's probably. Then beat me. If you do, I will wait for you to get it back and not complain. But. Swason snapped her fingers with a mean smile on her face. Don't think it will be easy. A girl was buried under a mountain of books. Karen was on full alert when she saw this, as the girl seemed dead, but once she listened closely, Korean could hear the girl's sleeping breath. It was the owner of the room, Tiana, slovenly sleeping. Oh, you're back, Karen. Nick greeted. What happened to Tiana? Apparently she's been studying all night. I tried to wake her up but she wouldn't respond, and I can't lock the door, so I can't leave either. Nick sighed and Karen smiled. You can go now, I'll stay. Thanks. But what was she studying? I did ask, it was too niche for me to understand. All Karen could do was nod to Nick's vague response. When Tiana started talking fast about her field of expertise, only Bond could follow. And since Bond himself used many older terms, he did a poor job explaining it as well. Sometimes, the two would get excited talking about it, and the remaining three would look on with a little envy. How did it go with you? It was fine. No problems. I see. But I don't think she's backing out. Then all we can do is work hard to beat them. Karen responded with a confident smile, and Tiana suddenly woke up. Oh, welcome back, Karen. You're still here, Nick. What do you mean I'm still here? I couldn't leave because I have no idea where the key to the entrance is. Sorry. But I'm glad you're here. Why? I need a test subject. Nick quietly started stepping back. No, wait. I mean, I need a training partner. Don't scare me. I want you to get hit by my new magic. So a test subject then. I need to prepare some things first. I need swords. I don't care if they're cheap and broken. I think 10 should do it. HN. Is that for 1,000 sword peak? Oh well, we can afford that. And I need a disposable magic item like a charm. It's expensive but it's alright. We'll make up for it with the money we get for taking down Ushi whatever. Wait. I have no idea where you're going with this. And I need things that a blacksmith would have. I should draw it, that would be faster. Anyway, let's do it. Why yes. Nick could only nod as he looked at the alluring sparkle in Tiana's eyes. Nick and the others left Labyrinth City. At first, they planned to go to the area behind Sea Anemone, but Tiana said such a cramped space would be dangerous, so they picked somewhere more spacious. They were now at the entrance of the G-rank Labyrinth Sticky Goo Gate. There it would not matter if they made noise or caused damage. Tiana could let loose. Wow. Nick and Karen shuddered at that peculiar and gruesome sight. Several swords laid around them, smashed to pieces. This would not happen normally. Swords would break and bend, but not shatter and scatter. What did you? Nick asked Tiana, as she ecstatically caressed her weapon. At first glance, it looked like a big round shield, but in reality it was not a defensive item, it was a bona fide weapon. Nick had no idea what happened, all he could understand was the immense destructive power it unleashed and the destruction it caused. So, this is Tiana's power, he thought, as a chill ran down his spine. I can explain the specifics later, but I want to ask something first. What? Will this work on the monsters in Thousand Sword Peak? Yes. Nick gave a short answer, as he looked at the trees that had been cut down and the smashed swords hit by Tiana's shockwave. The biggest issue is whether or not it will work inside Thousand Sword Peak. That mechanism uses magic, right? It's theoretically more or less the same as your stepping. I had no problems using it inside a barrier that weakened magic. Magic sealing barriers vary in strength, but they're all the same on a fundamental level. Truthfully, the magic sealing barrier was activated normally, and died out with time. That barrier had no signs of being broken, but there were also no signs that it had suppressed magic and its activation. So basically, we can use it during the match. There was a glare hiding behind Tiana's quiet voice, like a warning before a lightning strike. Adventurers who don't believe in humanity will save the world, Chapter 128, before the match. In Sea Anemone, Nick was drinking alcohol, an uncommon sight. He drank up the ale in the wooden mug, and even more unusually, grumbled with Sem, that Tiana, saying she'll use it in the match. Why did she say that so full of confidence and went to sleep right after? We haven't had our final preparatory meeting. Ha ha ha. She's the most free-spirited among us after all. Yes, but I wish she would worry a bit more. I'm sure she gave it a lot of thought. Said Sem with a grin while sipping his ale. They had their ale with simple millet porridge, although it also had minced greens and ground meat, so it was not that plain. The meat itself was seasoned with a sweet and salty seasoning made from fermented beans. It went quite well with the ale. This is called miso, right? It's not so bad once you get used to it. Apparently it comes from the south. It can be made with barley too. It's not bad. How about we try it next time we have to camp? Said Nick as he drank. By this point, he had already drank more than double of what Sem had. You're going fast today, aren't you? I drink from time to time too. But I'm not that strong, so maybe I should leave it at that. Is this really just about Tiana? Said Sem with a smile, and Nick smiled awkwardly. You saw right through me, It's a skill I've acquired a long time ago. Are you worried about something? Nick took a deep breath and placed the empty mug on the table. I'm not making any progress with the homework that Olivia left me. Oh, I remember. She was sticking to the wall like a frog, right? No, that's not it. I want to see that too, but she was standing up straight on the wall. I can't imagine that. And then she touched my cheek for a second and sent me flying. She said that's what she used to finish off White Mask. Ho! I don't get it. Well, of course. Said Sem as though it was obvious. Only a prodigy would master something just by watching. Well, you're kind of a prodigy yourself, but I think learning that in a month after watching it once is asking for too much. Well, I guess that's true. Did Tiana spark this in you? But don't forget that you also light a fire under those two. You don't have to feel anxious. Really. And the same goes for me too. While everyone was busy thinking about this and that, I managed to swipe something wonderful. Swipe? What? Nargava's belongings. Not just his things related to pharmaceutics, he left a lot of things related to magic as well. Said Sem as he took an old notebook out of his pocket. That's Nargava's research notes about magic. They are very easy to understand. I've learned a little about earth magic too. It's only basic stuff, but it would normally take quite a bit of money in studying to learn this. I have also gotten my hands on other things too, such as magic items. No. No. Not fair. Sem cackled at Nick's exasperated expression. Well, saying swipe is a little misleading. I did receive all of it properly. Really? The person sorting through the things in his room was at a loss at how to deal with it. If he took it to the order, it would all just get confiscated, but if an amateur tried to sell magic items on the town market they would easily track it down. He said I might as well use them. Magic items. The things he used to kidnap people. Are you sure you want to use things that could be evidence? No problem. These things were stored away and there's barely any traces that they were ever even taken outside. They'll be useful too. Well, I guess the things that Nargava left behind would be useful. Nick nodded with a serious expression, but his expression put a question on Sem's head. Do you still think we'll lose? Well, we won't know the result until it's over. It's not like our duel with the Steel Tiger crew, this is all about power. But this time I think things will work out even if we lose. Tiana and Karen smooth things over with our opponents too. In fact, I would say that at this point defeating Ushiwaka and bringing peace back to the labyrinth is more important. That's just it. The part about them having smoothed things over. I think they're incredible. And Karen got so strong before I realized it. People can't just stay the same. Sem's words had some weight to them. A lot had happened to him due to the way people changed and transformed. Nick knew this very well. Yes. I think I should have listened to Olivia more. Do you have trouble dealing with her? Well, it's not easy, but I feel like I should have asked and trained more before she went off somewhere all of a sudden. It's alright, Nick. I think you're destined to attract strange people. That's not funny, said Nick as he laughed. I've been dealing with all sorts of weird people lately, like Olivia and Alice, give me a break. There's even something weird going on with my old party. Something weird? Ah. This is all hypothetical, but Nick tried to keep his cool as he spoke. A member of my old party may have killed someone. Killed? A knight from the Order of the Sun was after someone selling stolen goods, and was found dead. Killed by a katana. That's the leader of all martial arts, Argus, and Garaso. Both use the katana, and both are excellent with it. Alice is clearly suspecting them, and she came to me looking for information. Said Nick with a stern expression, and Sem fixed his posture before answering, also with a serious expression. Nick, I don't know if those suspicions are just, but there is nothing we can do regardless. It has nothing to do with us. I guess. Just checking, do you want to protect them, or would you turn them in if you had the chance? Neither. That's. Sem placed his hand on his chin and thought for a bit. Nick was also silent as he gulped down the remaining ale in his mug. Sem then asked for a refill for Nick, and muttered. Do you just want to know? I guess that's it. Bingo. Nick felt as though Sem had put into words the vague feelings that Nick could not quite explain. How did you come to that conclusion? I've been thinking the same thing all this time. Why did I have to be expelled from the temple? Why did that have to happen to me and me alone? How can people that cause pain to someone innocent, and take from others just to rise in the ranks? There was something indescribably scary about Sem's expression. That was not all he had experienced. When he went out at night, he got involved with women, talked with men, and interacted with sinful people. When all of this was put in a pot and heated, the result was something approaching some sort of truth. Something about him gave off that impression, like he knew the answer to life itself. As though looking at someone was enough for him to find their most shameful sins. People who stood in front of him, not the ones walking beside him, always felt nervous, but also expectant. But Nick knew better than to let himself get carried away by this. He knew Sem was a friend, not someone he should expect to save him. I don't know about that stuff, but I do know one thing. What? If you ask someone odious why you had a crappy time, you're going to get a crappy answer. Ha ha ha. You're right. So the best thing to do is to forget about it and move on. At least that's what I thought until a few days ago. I want an answer, even a crappy one. Not knowing doesn't sit well with me. Well. Yes, I agree. I want to know the truth. Even if I don't accept it, at least I can punch someone when I don't accept it. Then do it. Do what? Go see all martial arts. If we rank up to D or C rank, we're bound to bump into them. Don't you think you should show up by your own terms and say what you think? As things stand right now, do they have any reason to be afraid of us? As Nick heard Sem, he felt as though a weight was being lifted off his shoulders. Yeah. Honestly, I don't care if they're under suspicion. Judging people for their crimes is a job for the Order. It's not something for me to worry about. Adventurers who don't believe in humanity will save the world, Chapter 129, Thousand Sword Peak, Part 1. Thousand Sword Peak was a mountain in the Five Rings mountain range. The most beautiful among them, but also the strangest. When looking up at its peak, it shined beautifully like a snowy mountain, but it was most certainly not something peaceful. It was actually the shine of blades. Tree trunks were shaped like spear and sword handles, ready to be picked up, and said trees grew blades instead of fruit and leaves. At the foot of the mountain, some blades could be seen on the ground, but the higher up one went, the greater the density of said blades. The peak of the mountain seemed like a world where titans fought day and night. It was the time between night and dawn, and 12 people stood at the foot of this mountain. 5 members of survivors, 4 members of wanderers, and Wilma, who volunteered to be the referee for this match, along with 2 subordinates. It's rare for you to come to a labyrinth just for a match, said Nick in a sarcastic tone, to which Wilma snorted. I'm not here just for the match, I have to confirm that Ushiwaka has been defeated. This is kind of a loose match in terms of rules, but you can't have any more assistants other than your current members, and fighting directly against each other is forbidden. Be careful. Got it. I understand, said both leaders, Nick and Bellocchio. Wilma nodded with a serious expression. I know you want to start right away, but we need to set the starting route. Thousand Sword Peak was divided into different routes. There were 2 going from the foot of the mountain until the 3rd point, where both routes converged in the den of monsters called Dagger Wolves. Regardless of which route a party chooses, they would have to defeat a pack of Dagger Wolves. From the 3rd to the 6th point, there were 3 routes, which converged again, and separated once more into 2 different routes until the peak. At the top of the mountain, the strongest Oni-type monster, a great ogre, usually awaited. But this time, it was different. The difficulty level is pretty much the same for both routes, but there are advantages and disadvantages depending on party composition, so let's do this fairly, said Wilma as she took a coin from her pocket, and flung it into the air with her thumb. Heads, said Nick, to which Bellocchio said, tails then. When the coin returned to Wilma's hand, it showed heads. Survivors will pick their path. Then. I want the short sword route. Tiana interjected just as Nick was about to answer. Are you sure? Yes. Thousand Sword Peak's first 2 routes were known as the short sword and axe route. As the names implies, the short sword route had short swords that could be picked up, and monsters that wielded them. The axe route was no different. The difficulty level was more or less the same, but there were differences. The axe route was longer and had strong axe-wielding hobgoblins, which were more menacing than short swords. But since the terrain was level and open, it was easy to traverse with enough firepower. The short sword route was shorter, but the path was narrower and had many twists and turns. It was not to the point where ropes and wedges would be necessary, but it would take some time to get through for people not used to hiking. Neither party was at a level where hobgoblins would cause them trouble, so the short sword path was seen as a little disadvantageous. However, Nick and Tiana's faces were filled with confidence. Alright, so that takes care of the first route. Whoever reaches the third point and takes down the monsters first gets to decide the next route, and the same goes for the next one. How about it? Got it. Understood. Nick and Bellocchio nodded. Now Tiana, show me the fruits of your labor, said Bellocchio as he looked at Tiana. Contrary to how she usually wore it, her robe was closed from the neck all the way to her legs. She was also not holding her staff, but rather something wrapped in a black cloth. It seemed to have the flat shape of a shield, but it was impossible to tell what it actually was. Tiana snickered, showing no intention to explain what it was. I see, you are not going to tell me. Master, at this point, we are both adventurers of the same rank. Don't forget we are competing against each other, said Tiana, and Bellocchio smiled. Well then. Begin. Wilma raised her hand, and everyone started moving. The forest was thick enough to deflect sunlight, but it was most certainly not dark. The bushes and ground surrounding the path shone ominously. Soraya. Gua. Nick and Karen wielded short swords as they kicked around hobgoblins. The swords they used were practically identical to the ones the hobgoblins used, and obviously, they did not prepare it beforehand. This was a true source of the silvery shine when adventurers at the foot of the mountain gazed upon the mountain, the famous swords that naturally grew in Thousand Sword Peak. They have handles and guards and everything. How strange, said Karen. That's just how this place is. How does it feel? Normal. Right? Karen answered apathetically, and Nick smiled awkwardly. They're not very well sharpened, but they're better than cheap swords you can buy in the arms store. I don't have a problem with it now, but... Aren't you worried that we're going to step on a blade while we're fighting? We'll be fine as long as we stay on the path and be careful not to step on the grass or run around near the trees. The safest option is to follow the paths the labyrinth provides. Got. Then there's no problem. Alright. Now. Nick turned around and saw Bond juggling short swords. Yo-ho. Stop playing around. I am not playing. Soraya. With very sharp movements, Bond threw some of the swords he was playing with, hitting the heads of hobgoblins as though they were sucked into them. Ooh, nice. Great job, said Karen and Sem, to which Bond puffed out his chest and smiled proudly. It doesn't look like Bond is having any trouble. Same goes for Sem. Yes, I can handle a short sword like this. If the need arises, I'll help, but for now I think it's best if I preserve my magic energy and stamina. Thanks. And finally, Nick turned towards Tiana. Do you think it will work? Wait. The magic energy seal is stronger than I expected. Tiana took off her robe the moment they started walking up the mountain, and underneath she was wearing tight leather clothes and some protective equipment, such as an arm guard. However, the most conspicuous item was the large boorish shield, which contrasted against the rest of her stylish equipment. It was the secret weapon that Tiana spent days working on. Since no magic energy comes out, its output can become too big. If it spins too fast it gets hard to control. However, she could still not unleash the full power of said weapon. I get that it's difficult, but we don't have time. You can stay back while we fight and practice. Got it. Tiana seemed flustered, but not desperate enough for it to cloud her judgment. She accepted Nick's idea, and steeled herself. Let's keep going. Adventurers who don't believe in humanity will save the world, Chapter 130, Thousand Sword Peak, Part 2. Oni-type monsters were generally intelligent. Many could understand words and even grasp the finer points of fighting in a group. They could even take full advantage of their weapons. They were monsters that resembled people not just in shape, but in intelligence as well. A group of 10 hobgoblins set their eyes on Nick and his party, and began encircling them to block their escape to make sure they would kill them. There's so many of them, what a pain. Sem. Here it goes. Mighty. Nick received Sem's strengthening magic and slipped between the hobgoblins. Gagya. He moved into the hobgoblins' encirclement. The hobgoblins tried to catch him, but it was like trying to catch mist. As a panicked hobgoblin tried to respond with its short sword, it suddenly found itself upside down, as a powered-up Nick smoothly grabbed it by the ankles and flipped it upside down. In the next moment, it was up in the air, headed towards its surprised comrades. Don't look away. Karen did not fail to take advantage of the unrest taking over the whole group, and in the blink of an eye, scattered them all over the place with great vigor. Despite their numbers, the hobgoblins were not much of a problem. Alright, let's keep moving. Tiana. The paths converge right ahead, so give up and let's go. Wait just a little. No. Try it on the next route. Nick grabbed Tiana's hand and pulled her along. Their pace was not slow, but not fast either. Nick felt as though it was 50% slower than when he went here with all martial arts. But Nick, shouldn't we let the other team take care of the mid-boss in the next area to save our strength? Asked Sem. No. Dagger wolves shouldn't be a problem for a party of our rank. The chance to pick the next route is more important. One of them is clearly the better route. Better? The longsword route. From the 3rd point to the 6th, the path split into 3 routes. The first was the longsword route. The most orthodox among these 3. There, monsters called lesser ogres, which were basically smaller ogres, would attack with long swords, but that was about it, and they would not perform any fancy attacks. The path itself was also relatively flat, and not very prone to accidents, so most adventurers picked this route. The second, was the long spear route. This route was more troublesome. The lesser ogres here used long spears, but there were fewer of them, so they did not pose much of a threat. However, there was another, peculiar monster named Magic Bullet Shell. This snail-like monster would feed on the spears that grew naturally in the labyrinth, and generate its hard outer shell. However, this shell was nothing more than a secondary threat. The real danger was the way it stored foreign matter inside of it and shot it at enemies in an arrowhead-like shape. This would be easy to deal with if an adventurer got close and dug into its shell, but to get close in the first place, they would have to slip past its bullets. Yes. We're not going to pick the long spear route. And the battle ring route is out of the question. The third route was known as Battle Ring. It got its name from the throwing weapon called chakram that could be found in it. Not many people could use it well. One would think the monsters that inhabited this route would use it skillfully, but even the lesser ogres could not use it well. Many even gave up on using them as throwing weapons and instead used them at close range. There was not much more to this route, so it was less menacing than the other 2. However, the adventurers walking through this path would also have to use the same weapons, meaning the route's difficulty depended on how well the adventurers could use chakram. Some would say this was a place for strange hobbyists. I think using a chakram sounds pretty fun, but... I was going to say you're the only one here that thinks so, but... Tiana said with a giggle. I want to try it too. Work on your special technique first. If you can't use it, we'll have to pick the safer route. I know. As they talked, they reached the point where the 2 routes converged, and heard the sounds of a battle. It appeared Wanderers hadn't finished the mid-boss, Dagger Wolf just yet. Nick and Tiana let out sighs of relief. They're underestimating us, aren't they? Ah, geez. They said as they looked at how unconcerned their opponents seemed. Willie, be careful. You are not used to fighting in the front line. Marcus, help him. Oh. Leave it to me. Now. Wanderers were fighting a dagger wolf, a wolf as big as a tiger, that held a dagger in its mouth. It pounced on the wanderers, but Bellocchio yelled instructions while Willie and Marcus followed them as if they were his limbs, avoiding attacks perfectly. Marcus skillfully dodged the dagger wolf's attacks with minimal movement, not letting himself fall victim to its speed. Eventually, he put the monster in check with an axe he picked up along the way. The weirdest part was Will, the sorcerer. His movements were not as skillful as Marcus, but his axe attack was strange. Here I go. Wind pressure slash. The moment Willie's attack hit the dagger wolf, a certain pressure of sorts ran through its body. Even though Willie was clearly a lot lighter, the monster's big body was sent flying. It's like the fire dragon slash. Yes. What's that all about? Said a puzzled Karen, and Nick whispered in agreement. Did he learn? Magic blade. Magic blade? Tiana then answered Nick's question. It's a technique to activate magic through a weapon, like it's done with a staff. Except instead of firing it from the tip, it activates the moment the weapon makes contact. It's as powerful as it is difficult, and it's supposed to be pretty high-level magic. Tiana tilted her head, but Willie was indeed using such a technique. All right. Now, said Bellocchio, and Swason, who was waiting in the back, jumped forward. A strange blue something surrounded her body, but it was not just for show. It was bringing her incredible agility and strength. Sha! Gyaw! Even a small hand axe repelled the monster's front limbs. The dagger wolf let out a pained roar, and Wanderer's victory was certain. Bellocchio is only giving directions, but he's not just saving his strength. Is he training them while having them take down the dagger wolf? He was waiting for us. That's it, isn't it? Nick agreed with Karen's displeased whisper. Perhaps it was his way of showing he had no intention to decide the match right then and there, but he did seem very relaxed. Nick thought to himself it was very cheeky, when suddenly Tiana interjected with a cheerful voice. I see. I get it. What's going on with them, Tiana? I don't know. Hey. Nick mumbled, but Tiana ignored him and started fiddling with a short sword she picked up. That's not it. I figured out how to use magic in this labyrinth. Adventurers who don't believe in humanity will save the world, Chapter 131, Thousand Sword Peak, Part 3. When Bellocchio reached the point where the two paths converge, he was a little disappointed, as he was not rushing on the way there. Still, he did have a plan. This was practically his garden. This was a place that was supposedly rough for a sorcerer like Bellocchio. However, the idea that magic did not work in Thousand Sword Peak was a little misleading. To be more precise, it was a place where magic could not be fired into the air. Magic that was activated by touch, such as healing or strengthening magic, worked as well as always, but offensive magic was usually performed by firing something at a distant enemy. This meant that if one could inflict damage by touch, even offensive magic would work. However, this would rip the user's hand to shreds. This was why sorcerers used staff and healers such as priests did not. Sorcerers had to make sure their own magic would not hurt them. When Bellocchio was young, he had a very tough time in this labyrinth, and having to stay back while the vanguard did all the work caused him a great deal of stress. Feeling so useless after training so much hurt him. But that was when he happened to see a party composed entirely of sorcerers calmly exploring the labyrinth. He figured there had to be something to them, and he found the answer. A technique called Magic Blade. This technique would normally came with various hurdles. Rather than using a jewel at the tip to fire magic, like a staff would, Magic Blade would imbue the blade itself with magic, and activate its effect when slashing. However, not a lot of weapons could endure this. A regular sword would only take a few hits before being destroyed. It was possible to hold back the power of this technique, but that would have its effect. By acquiring a magic sword that could handle Magic Blade, one could wield a lot of power, but to do so they would need either a lot of money or a lot of luck to find one in a labyrinth. Taking into account the amount of time, money, and effort needed, it would probably be more efficient to improve one's skill with a regular sword. Rich hobbyists and A and S rank adventurers willing to spend the money were one thing, but it was certainly not the sort of thing one would expect an intermediary adventurer to use. However, Bellocchio was a strange, studious man. As he searched for a solution to his problem, he noticed that he could break as many weapons as he wanted in Thousand Sword Peak, and it would matter little. With this idea in mind, Bellocchio realized he could use this to practice his magic more than ever before. At a glance, Bellocchio looked as though he had lost his mind, as he used the place that was avoided by sorcerers like himself as a playground of sorts to satisfy his curiosity. As a result, Bellocchio not only learned a lot about Magic Blade, but also that the weapons in Thousand Sword Peak were a type of magic sword, although very weak ones. That in itself was not very useful, but it meant that magic was easily transmitted through them, meaning it would not take much time for one to be able to learn Magic Blade and use it in actual combat. His playground would go on to become his hunting ground. Bellocchio generally kept that discovery to himself, even hesitating to tell it to the other members of his party. Considerable strength was necessary to use such a place as a hunting ground, and a weak sorcerer beating this dungeon with powerful items or a powerful team did not have much merit in the long run. So, he figured he should at least hide the fact that he beat this dungeon not by conventional means. Sorcerers of higher ranking parties who also realized this came up with the same idea. This was the main reason why Bellocchio chose to tell Willy about it and not Tiana. In the meantime, he also felt she had been losing sight of how important it was to investigate things on her own. He had purposefully spoken to her in an inflammatory way to try to light a fire under her, but seemed disappointed that it would probably end in failure. However, just as he was thinking this, Gaiawa. What? The dagger wolf's head. In one hit. Something sharp came flying from behind, and the head of the boss of that converging point was sent flying. With surprise and expectation in his mind, Bellocchio turned around. Tiana. I was waiting for you. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, master. What he saw was Tiana holding a strange shield. You know it's bad manners to jump in while someone else is fighting, right? Marcus said with a grin as he approached survivors. Nick took a step forward and responded. You're right, but it's a little different this time, so let it go. Alright, but you owe us one. Leave that for after the match. Marcus was only joking, so he paid no attention to Nick's light provocation. There were also bigger things on his mind. So, lady. What is that? Marcus pointed to what Tiana was carrying. He could not call it a shield. It had a shape similar to a shield, but its use was clearly different. Tiana used it by holding it horizontally and aiming it at her enemy like a staff or bow. Does that fire short swords? How? You really think I'm going to just tell you? Tiana smiled proudly, and Marcus seemed frustrated. Bellocchio then took a step forward. Let us confirm something first. Inside that disc was a short sword rotating very quickly. And then, while maintaining its rotation, you fired it at the dagger wolf and sliced its head. Am I correct? Yes. Bellocchio looked at Tiana's weapon with a stern expression. As he stared at the strange device while Tiana remained silent, a tense atmosphere formed around them. Tiana. Yes. This was dangerous. Yes. You use magnetics and lightning to make the short sword inside the disc spin. How do you keep the blade spinning around its center? I use an alchemical magic item to create a temporary bearing. And by releasing it, the short sword spinning inside it fired out. What do you call this weapon? For now, a magic bow. I see. About that magic bow. Yes. It is dangerous, don't you think? Yes. Tiana felt uncomfortable, but agreed with Bellocchio's very serious words. If it fires in an unexpected direction, it can hurt you or one of your partners. I am also sure you cannot control it perfectly when it spins quickly. And you also need to think about what happens to this spinning blade when you stumble and fall. No, well, I made it so the rotation stops when the correct process isn't followed. It will not stop immediately. Do you have brakes of some sort? No. Then think about that. You should also have a shield of some sort to cover and protect yourself. But if I add more parts it might make it difficult to aim. How about using wind magic to fire a blade without making it spin in the first place? You could use a plate spring to create a device similar to a bow gun. The output wouldn't be near enough to be viable as a weapon. There is this magic sealing barrier, so the moment it leaves my hands the effect of the spell is lost. I do use it to help propel it forward and establish the direction, but the people around them stopped being able to follow their intense discussion. Specific terms they could not understand were being thrown around, and by the end, the way they were speaking was indistinguishable from a full-blown argument. Wrong. You do have a point there. But yes. That's the problem, and many more words of affirmation and negation were bouncing back and forth. Enough to make one's head spin. All right. I will add a shield with a window in front of me. That way I can aim, and still be protected in case it fires accidentally. Good. As the people around them were getting sick of it, the discussion finally came to an end. Ah. Are you done? Asked Nick. Wait. I'll have this fixed in less than an hour. It will only be a stopgap solution, so redo it when this is over, Tiana. Yes, understood. Nick meant that he wanted them to wrap up what they were doing so they could continue, but neither understood this, and took what he said at face value. Adventurers who don't believe in humanity will save the world, Chapter 132, Thousand Sword Peak, Part 4. You're too good at cooking. It's strange to be eating a warm meal in a place like this. Nick smiled proudly as he heard Willie and Marcus' compliments. Really? I guess it's because my former party ate so much. Look at the two sisters that can't take their eyes off their food. Marcus pointed to Swayson and Karen, who silently ate Nick's labyrinth chicken. What? It's good, so what? You didn't use tomatoes this time, did you? Both Karen and Swayson looked at Marcus like they had something more to say, but did not want to stop eating. This time, Nick made labyrinth chicken with green pheasant, so he used ginger and spices instead of dried tomatoes. The higher we go, the colder it gets. It's not very chilly yet, but eating something like this is better than something that cools the body. As they let out voices of admiration, everyone enjoyed Nick's cooking. Ah, wait. Why are you eating lunch? It's not lunch. It's not noon yet, so it's brunch. Now, Tiana. Do not raise your voice like that. Tiana and Bellocchio joined in. Brunch is something that combines breakfast and lunch. Didn't you have a good breakfast? When climbing a mountain, it's important to take frequent breaks. You might not realize it, but it drains your energy. Sit down and eat too. We have enough for you, Bellocchio. Thank you. I will have some then. Both were probably hungry, because the meals that Nick handed them disappeared in the blink of an eye. Bellocchio often joked about being an old man, but it certainly did not show in the way he ate. So, I'll ask again. Are you done? Yes, completely. Tiana said with a full smile. I apologize for getting so worked up. Said Bellocchio. Well, it will be good for us too. So Nick. Which route will you choose? Are you sure? Asked a surprised Nick. Tiana did deliver the finishing blow to the dagger wolf, but only because she suddenly inserted herself into the battle. The other party had every right to complain if they so choose. I am fine with it. What do you three think? I don't mind either. We really were taking too long. It can't be helped. Willie and Marcus seemed indifferent. What about you, Swayson? Well, if Mr. Bellocchio says so, I won't complain, said Suisen with a certain sharpness in her eyes. Well then, go ahead. Although I think I know what you will choose. Yes, Nick stood up and pointed to one of the three paths. We picked the battle ring route. Of course, said Bellocchio with a smile. It seems like the perfect ammunition for that magic bow. That way you can advance while picking as many arrows as you can. Good plan. Thanks. What about you? Nick responded to the compliment with slight sarcasm. Long spear. Not long sword. You are not the only ones with a trick up your sleeve. I think it is about time for me to get serious. I was planning to rest until the next route, but it seems I cannot afford to do so. As Bellocchio spoke, his partner smiled. Tiana had previously heard her master say this labyrinth was like his garden. The survivors were nervous, as they were about to know what he meant by that, Bellocchio's true strength. Let us begin the match proper, shall we? The strange sight continued. Survivors walked through a path that was wide enough for a carriage to pass beside them. Just outside the path, on both sides, was a thick forest, where silver shining blades grew below trees like grass and mushrooms. Ufufu. That smile is scary. Rude. Tiana picked one of them and set it on her prized magic bow. The complex, mechanical sound it made sounded powerful. Bowguns and crossbows use things like pulley systems, so even weak people could use them to fire powerful arrows and bullets. They were very important long-range weapons for people who could not cast spells, as weapons that used oil and gunpowder were strictly forbidden in this country. It was also easier to learn how to use than a bow and arrow. It is a reassuring thing to have, in this continent where we cannot use guns, said Bond. Guns? Ah, those old weapons, right? Yes. They are weapons that shoot lead bullets by means of an explosion caused by gunpowder, and not fire brought about by magic. That sounds scary. It does because natural fire is hard to put out. Magic fire will go out once it runs out of magic energy to consume, or it can be easily put out by creating water. But natural fire is dangerous, and it can easily spread. Fire that did not stem from magic was called nature's fire or natural fire. It would be alright to start a small fire to warm oneself, but leaving it burning for a full 24 hours by consuming firewood was not recommended. In nobles' mansions and castles, it was recommended that they used magic items in the kitchen or as heating during the cold season. Stop chatting, they're coming. Lesser ogres came rushing from behind the bushes. They were holding battle rings, but were still too far away to throw them. But even though they could not throw them that far, that was not a problem for Tiana. Oh! Shoot! Yelled Nick, before Tiana stepped forward and pulled the trigger. And then, with an ominous sound of wind being cut, a battle ring was shot, spinning rapidly. Gwa! Ga! The battle ring that was shot flew in a straight line at first, but curved at a certain point, due to its spinning. This added to the speed at which it traveled, making it very difficult to read its trajectory. The lesser ogre that was on the receiving end of this attack had no time to defend itself, and fell dead on the spot. 2 more were injured by the ricochet. However, there was something else that proved to be even more disadvantageous for the lesser ogres. Fear. Let's go, Karen. Bond. Oh. Leave it to me. Nick, Karen, and Bond rushed forward and slashed at the panicking lesser ogres. The battle was decided after the first shot was fired. With nimble moves, Nick used the battle ring like a knife to cut his enemies, while Karen hit them as though she was punching them, and Bond finished them off. Oh my! I didn't even have time to fire again. That will be your homework. How to reduce the time it takes to fire again. If there were 2 slots, I could help reload, said Sem as he checked to see if anyone was hurt, and Tiana shrugged. I had to make this in a hurry. That's asking for too much. But just having a long-range attack changes everything. Our pace will be faster now. Nick said while smiling broadly, but Tiana seemed pensive. I sure hope so. What's wrong? We don't know what my master is planning. We have to hurry. I guess. But no matter what they're doing, there's nothing we can do about it. Actually, we are almost at the halfway point, so we should take more breaks. Yes. It will be bad if we do not take a break, considering the altitude. Said Bond, in agreement with Nick's words. Adventurers who don't believe in humanity will save the world, Chapter 133, Thousand Sword Peak, Part 5. The paths converged again on the sixth point. At this point, the height was considerable and the view was pleasant, although this pleasant view also meant even a single misstep or slip could be dangerous. Since the area was concave, there was little threat of falling if one just walked normally, but it had happened to some people who were too focused on fighting. It was important to always remain calm. The monsters waiting in this area were called sword mantis. It was a praying mantis larger than a person and had not sickles, but sharp swords in its arms. Another thing that differed from a regular praying mantis was its wide range of movement, meaning it could attack by freely moving its arms. Moreover, it did more than just attack at close range. This monster would slice the swords growing from its arms to throw them at its enemies, and replace them with ones that grew from the ground. This troublesome monster came in a pair, one male and one female. Jayagyagia. Uoria. Karen used a longsword she picked up when she reached this area to block the sword mantis' fierce attack. It was considerably stronger than a lesser ogre, and its movements were unlike the Oni-type monsters, and were very hard to read. Unlike slow golems, bug-type monsters were quick even if they had huge bodies. Karen. I'm Al, right? The sword mantis raised both arms and swung them downwards at the same time, to which Karen responded by swinging upwards with all her strength. After a piercing metallic sound echoed, the sword mantis arms were sent flying. Karen was happy that she won this contest of strength, but Nick's yell cut it short. Watch out, Karen. Before she knew it, Nick had put himself between her and the monster while crouching. Another metallic sound was heard, and when Karen looked down, she was surprised to see that the monster had skillfully picked up a sword with its foot and attempted to stab her. Thankfully, Nick foiled this attack. Sorry. Forget that. Now. This was probably the monster's best trick. Make its opponent focus on its arms, and attack them from below. Bug's eyes were not the same as humanoid or Oni-type monsters. Their eyeballs did not move, which made it difficult to see what their intentions and targets were. Still, Nick's instincts put an end to its plan. With all its attacks shut down, Karen swung horizontally at a defenseless sword mantis neck. Uria. Serya. However, she did not stop there, and also severed its remaining limbs. One could not relax just by cutting the neck of a bug-type monster, as it could still attack as long as its limbs could move. It was necessary to deal so much damage that it would be physically unable to move. Are you all right over there? This is rough. I will need assistance soon. Karen yelled, and Bond responded. Bond, Tiana, and Sem faced the remaining sword mantis. Ah, geez. As her partners protected her, Tiana fiddled with her crossbow. Ah, geez. Now of all times. I'll have it fixed in 3 minutes. There was a malfunction at a crucial time. The first few shots were fine, but when the sword mantis returned fire by throwing a long word, Tiana carelessly used the bow gun as a shield. The weapon itself was not broken, but some internal parts were bent, and needed repair. As a result, Bond was mostly fighting the monster alone, with Sem acting as support. Choya. Bond was skilled with the sword, but he was not all-powerful. In the end, all he did was copy the skills of those that previously wielded him, and since his stature, sword, and field of battle differed, he could not copy their power to its fullest. He could defend against the sword mantis' fierce attacks, but not overwhelm it. It was a deadlock, but just as Karen and Nick were rushing to help, a voice could be heard coming from the back. "Everyone, can you move away a little?" Bond sensed something and stepped away. When Nick looked back to see where the voice came from, a vivid streak of light assaulted the monster. Eh! Suddenly, the sword mantis's body had a hole the size of a fist. It stood still, not even budging. After a few seconds, it took a weak step back. What? Tiana answered Nick's question. "It's just a throwing spear." Just. It's a throwing spear with its power increased by magic blade and thrown by a dragon person. That's it. The principle is simple, but it's stupidly strong. Tiana looked with bewilderment on her face at Bellocchio and his party, who were carrying a few spears. "Magic blade, lightning edge." Bellocchio whispered, and the tip of the spear he was carrying started shining. He handed this spear to Suisun, who stood next to him. She took a deep breath and focused her strength. A blue shining light started emanating from her body, and it looked as though she was about to explode. "Here goes." The second. Suisun stretched her arm back, and her gaze focused on the sword mantis, which could barely move. And as if firing an arrow from a bow, the spear was fired. Gah! The spear traveling at an incredible speed pierced the monster right through the center of its midsection. Its upper body was no longer being supported and fell to the ground with a big thud, followed by the lower half limply falling as well. "Got it!" celebrated Suisun, as survivors looked on with amazement on their faces. And then, Bellocchio stood in front of Tiana. "It seems you do not hold the monopoly on projectile weapons. Master that." "That?" Tiana trembled as she pointed toward Suisun. "That's not fair, is it?" "Is it not?" Tiana looked frustrated while her master was joyous. He was not smug, instead, rather happy like an innocent child, happy about getting to show off a trick. This wouldn't work without Suisun's strength, would it? It would not, but... Bellocchio took something strange out of his pocket. It was something that resembled a thin bamboo tube or a pipe cut vertically. "I can get some speed and distance with this spear thrower." Bellocchio took the butt end of a spear he picked up on the way and set it on the spear thrower. And then, after positioning himself as though he was about to throw a ball, he threw a spear through the spear thrower. The spear flew with a pleasant sound, but clearly much farther and faster than if Bellocchio had thrown it with his bare hands. "Why didn't you use it?" Tiana asked Suisun. "At this distance, I don't need it. Plus, I'm used to throwing it normally, and since I'm not used to that I might have missed." "But if you were used to this, it would have been better," said Bellocchio calmly, and Tiana looked at the ground. "Master. I have no choice but to admit you have got the better of me there. It is nice to be honest." Bellocchio praised sincerely. "Tiana, your tool also has many advantages. In my case, I have to be in a place where I can use magic blade as many times as I wish, but your crossbow can be used in other locations as well. I still need ammo, but..." "You're right. Yes. Also, the more complicated the mechanism is, the more prone to malfunction it becomes." Tiana was startled by this phrase, but did not let it show on her face. "Yes. Still, this is not a contest to see who has the better weapon," said Bellocchio as he looked at the two paths leading forward. This was the last time the paths diverged, and both led to the top. They were called Sky and Earth. Both had the same weapons, which is to say both had all the weapons that were found in this labyrinth so far. What set them apart from each other were the enemies that appeared in each path. The Sky route had enemies known as Tengu, a superior kind of Oni-type monster which were capable of flight. These monsters were physically weaker than other Oni-type monsters, but were agile and attacked from above. Obviously, they also threw the weapons growing in the labyrinth as they flew. The Earth route had ogres. A single ogre was strong enough to put a beginner party in danger, and here they popped up like mushrooms. Their bodies were a degree or two bigger than Tengu's, but they were by no means unbeatable opponents. In an environment where magic was not an option, it could be said they were easier to deal with than flying enemies. We will pick the sky route. Of course. What made the Tengu difficult to deal with was the lack of a long-range attack, such as magic. Obviously, this did not apply to people that could kill a sword mantis with a throwing spear. Well then. See you at the top. With a casual pace, wanderers walked away from the last converging point before the peak. Adventurers who don't believe in humanity will save the world, Chapter 134, Thousand Sword Peak, Part 6. The earth route was filled with rugged rock, and felt desolate with its lack of vegetation. Instead, swords and spears stuck to the ground like grave markers. The sky route was not much different, so people familiar with classic literature would say it was like the Asuras world. Asuras were mythological beings. People obsessed with fighting and always hungering for battle would turn into an Asura, and become trapped in an endless battle even after death. Still, only the scenery reminded people of this, not the monsters themselves. The ogres that appeared in this route were not as strong as the one Nick and his party once faced in the Goblin Forest. Although they were similar physically, they were not intelligent enough to speak, and their movements were simpler. Soraya. An ogre was hit by a chakram fired by Tiana, and the rest fell into panic. Monsters that were proud of their physical strength would panic the moment they encountered an opponent their huge muscles would not be effective against. This was common for Oni-type monsters, and while this intelligence of sorts was surprising, it also left them open for attacks. Go. I know. Nick, Karen, and Bond attacked the ogres with a short sword, broad two-handed sword, and one-handed sword respectively. The three fought perfectly in sync together, and the ogres that once gave them trouble were kicked around by Nick's staggering slashes and Karen and Bond's fierce attacks. Was it always this easy? Karen felt a little disappointed. The weapons we find in Thousand Sword Peak are effective against the monsters here, so that makes things easier. I see. As Nick answered Karen's question, the last remaining ogre attacked her, but her movements were too sharp, and she easily defeated it. With the ogres down, the area was suddenly quiet. Alright, let's go. Wait, calm down. Don't rush too much. But. Karen hesitated. The match's rules did mean that speed was very important, but at this current altitude, rushing too much could have the opposite effect, and result in them moving slower. Is what Nick was about to say before Karen slapped her own cheeks. "Ei." A clapping sound echoed. What's wrong? Nothing. Sorry. I was being impatient. I see. Well, drink some water. Let's all take a break. They headed towards a small rocky clearing and sat down. We are getting close, said Sem as he looked at the peak. Contrary to Blazing Bird Peak, they felt something mysteriously profound about it. As though it was trying to keep them away. This view is nostalgic. Nostalgic? Here. Responded Tiana to Nick, with clear surprise on her face. Yeah. Is something wrong? Nothing. It's just kind of weird, I guess. I was taken here to train and told to fight ogres. I couldn't beat them on my own, but I used staggering tactics and knocked them down. Ah. Tiana nodded. On their first adventure as a party, Nick fought an ogre by himself, although Karen delivered the finishing blow. Tiana, Karen, and Sem thought back to it. Your point of view has changed since then. You used to be taken places, and now you take others. Which one is easier? Neither is easy. And the two parties are completely different too. What were the other members like? There were 5 of us. Our leader was Argus the Weapon Master, and then there was the swordsman Garasso, the hunter Dean, the heavy warrior Balik, and me. No sorcerer. Thinking back, that is a bit weird. I did try to get them to hire one. And they said no. They just said it wasn't that kind of party. They sound stubborn. Well, even if we call it an adventure party, it was more like a dojo of sorts where we learned the all martial arts style. We were all like Argus pupils. We were all strong. Despite Nick's words sounding proud, his expression seemed bitter. Tiana noticed this, and answered with an awkward smile. It sounds like there's a lot of emotion behind those words. Not that I blame you. I've remembered some bad things. They would never take collecting materials seriously, and always left cashing them in to me even though they weren't careful at all about how they spent their money. Garaso was the worst. He liked to go out playing with women. Nonetheless, he was still terrible. What do you mean terrible? Asked Sem. The subject matter piqued his interest. He'd get tricked into giving them money and then forget all about it in 3 days. There was even that time he took his savings to some woman to supposedly get her out of prostitution. Not that he had a lot of money saved up to begin with. I know I'm not one to talk, but people need to be careful about not taking everything they hear seriously when they're involved in that sort of life. Said Sem with an awkward smile. But you still hung in there. Was there anything good about that place? Not really. Well, there was one. Oh. What? They were all very serious about their training. Even Garaso turned into a chaste monk when it came to his sword. Chaste monk, Tiana seemed to not believe it. No, it's true, you know. We wouldn't have gotten past rank C without a sorcerer if it wasn't the case. Is he the master of that thing you talked about called IAI? Yeah. Nick started remembering his conversations with Garaso. It was mostly him trying to get Nick to go after girls with him, or pestering him for money. He behaved just like an adventurer, in a bad way. Still, there were a few times when he actually acted like a proper senior to Nick, and taught him some things. Hey Nick, you've never gone out after women, What do you mean you're not interested? How long are you gonna stay a kid? Come on, please. Just give me a little advance payment. Your account book is all balanced, right? You don't know how to sharpen that short sword. Give me that, I'll show you. Alright, I'll teach you. See, when a monster has a hard shell like a bug, that doesn't mean you can't cut it. You just have to insert the blade in just the right way. Nick suddenly realized something. He was at a loss for words, and his face was frozen. Oh. What's wrong? No, nothing. I'm just thinking too much. We should get moving. Can all of you breath normally now? Everyone nodded. The match was almost over.